Yeah, so instead of, you know, hearing me bang some Snoop Dogg, some Dr. Dre, or some DJ Quick or whatever, you would hear me thumping Elliot Goldenthal, Jan Hammer, Mike Post, Bill Conti, James Horner, Jerry Goldsmith, Brad Fidel, Harold Faltermeyer. Ah, yeah, that's what you heard me bumping, on my journeys. Everyone, of course, I would listen to hip hop. That became a love later on, as I mentioned in the last episode, but I've been a soundtrack enthusiast for many years. And so I wanted to take this time to share with you a little bit of show and tell yet again. I did this before with the Power 106 stuff. So I figured I'd do this with the soundtrack stuff too, and kind of give you a nice little origin story real quick. When I think of how I got into soundtracks. And I'll preface this by saying that I'm not a bandwagon jumper. I don't do this because it's cool. I do it because I love it. I do it because I study it. I am a true enthusiast of this stuff. Okay. And I have listened to every single soundtrack that I've ever purchased or that was bought for me when I was a kid. I've listened to every single soundtrack that I have from start to finish multiple times, so much to the point to where I would memorize the arrangements, memorize how each composer differs from one another, because each composer has their own little touch. There's a difference between Danny Elfman and James Horner and John Williams, Elliot Goldenthal and the rest, Alan Silvestri. I would listen to how the notes were used. I would listen to the songs that were, of course, featured in the movie, and then the ones that were not featured in the movie, because sometimes on the soundtrack, you would get stuff that was not in the film. And sometimes that would be frustrating. For those of you that have been in collecting for a long time, you definitely can relate what I'll be talking about in this episode, because, man, it would be frustrating to get songs that are not in the film, and sort of a bonus to get songs, kind of extra songs, or a different version of the song. Sometimes you wouldn't get the movie version of the song. Okay. You would get some other version and you're like, wait a second, this is not how it sounds in the film. But that's how much of an enthusiast I was listening and watching these movies to really listen. Sometimes I would go to the movie to see a movie if I knew that a certain composer did the soundtrack. Like if I saw Danny Elfman in the credits, oh, I'm going to see Darkman. That's an example. It was that thing that I knew, okay, yeah, I want to hear what he's doing for this particular film. Okay. And there is a difference between soundtracks with multiple songs by different artists. And then you have the movie scores or film scores where you'll have a John Williams or a Danny Elfman or a Hans Zimmer compose all of the themes, all of the motifs of the movie. And I am definitely an enthusiast of both types of soundtracks, and I've been collecting them since I was a little kid. So going back, it's interesting because the very first soundtrack that I was ever introduced to was this one. Yeah, The Wiz. Of course, Michael Jackson, Diana Ross, and the rest. Yes, man. Wow. My grandmother used to play this all the time. And I played it so much on her record player that I ended up scratching up the album. So I ended up getting another copy, and that's this one. But 1978, this came out. I was 2 years old. This was my introduction to movie soundtracks. Okay. And then later on, of course, I would attend grade school, Wilshire Crest Elementary School in Los Angeles on Olympic Boulevard. Shout out to you guys that went there. And there was a composer by the name of Herbert Zipper, Dr. Zipper. You can look it up. Although Wikipedia, I wouldn't trust because Wikipedia is not always accurate, folks. It's not. But Herbert Zipper used to travel all around the world with his orchestra, and he taught orchestra for many years, and he would visit our school. Okay, now this is back in the days when schools were really still doing special stuff. Grade schools don't really do a lot of cool things like this anymore. They kind of changed the game up a little bit, especially with the arts. But back then, we were sort of the last generation that got these really nice gems in the 80s and little bit of the early 90s for some people. But so he would come, imagine you go to an assembly for about 45 minutes to an hour, and his orchestra would be positioned in the center of the auditorium, and the students would sit in a circle around the orchestra. Let me tell you something. I will never forget this for the rest of my life. Hearing symphony live, you're talking 40 instruments being played live, conducted by Herbert Zipper. You're seeing him conduct. It was one of the highlights of grade school for me and really opened me up to symphony. Now, I'm not well versed in symphony, like, for example, George Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue or the sonata that Kobe likes. Kobe really is a big fan of that. I think it's called the sonata. I don't know what number it is. There's all these different compositions and symphonies, right? I'm not familiar with all of the names of that. I'm more, I specialize more with movie scores. Excuse me. But to hear symphony live is an entirely different experience. And for those of you that have not done so, you got to do it. I was able to attend John Williams' performance at the Hollywood Bowl. And let me tell you, that was amazing. John Williams live at the Hollywood Bowl. I'll never forget it. It was absolutely amazing. He did an encore. My favorite composers of all time, top three: John Williams, number one; Danny Elfman, number two; Hans Zimmer, number three. Okay. And many of the others are thrown after that. So let me continue. So I would start collecting soundtracks. The Last Dragon, here it is. Love it, love it, love it. I actually got this from, I think, the Warehouse Music Store on La Brea in Hollywood, or it might have been that small music store. I forget the name of it. It was kind of like a mom and pop music store, but that's where I got this. I saw the movie at the Baldwin Theater. My mom took me to see. She actually bought this for me, but there it is right there. Motown Records. Love that soundtrack. Heard it several times. I mean, more than several times, but a lot of times. Here's another one. Beverly Hills Cop. What's up, Eddie? Anyway, Beverly Hills Cop. Now, what's interesting about this particular soundtrack, one of my favorite composers has a song on this soundtrack that was not used in the movie. Here is his name right there, Danny Elfman. There it is. Danny Elfman has a song called Gratitude, and I believe it was from a solo album that he did, but he also used to be a part of the band Oingo Boingo back in the 80s, those of you might remember, and then he started doing movie soundtracks. His real big premiere would be Pee-wee's Big Adventure, even though he did something before that. But anyway, yeah, the song is featured on the soundtrack, not in the movie. Like I said, this is what they did back in the days, and I never understood that when I was a kid getting these. Why is this song even on the soundtrack? I used to wonder that, but of course, there's various reasons. Sometimes they would, rush the soundtrack out, try to fill it up with stuff. Sometimes there were songs that were intended to be used in the film and they weren't. There's a lot of different reasons. All right. Here's another one, The Karate Kid Part 2. I actually saw The Karate Kid Part 2 before the original Karate Kid. All right, so there it is. I love Glory of Love by Peter Cetera, formerly of the group Chicago. Love Peter Cetera. And then we have this one here. And these are the soundtracks with various artists, different songs, okay? We're not getting into music scores just yet. I'm just sharing with you these particular selections. Here's Beverly Hills Cop 2, vinyl. For those of you that remember how difficult it was to find stuff, you had to go to different stores. You know what I mean? We didn't have the internet back then. So when you found stuff, you were really happy about it. And, we had Music Plus. We had the Warehouse Music Store. We had Sam Goody. We had Music Plus was a big one for me. Barnes and Noble, man. Barnes and Noble on the 3rd Street Promenade. Oh, my God. I can't tell you how many soundtracks I got from the Barnes and Noble that used to be on the 3rd Street Promenade. They shut that one down, I think, in 2018, fairly recent. But that one, they had 2 rows of soundtracks. Eventually, I would move over to Amoeba Records, okay, which also shut down recently, the one on Sunset. I think they're going to relocate that Amoeba Records, but I would also get some gems from there. But the bulk of my soundtrack collection came from the Barnes & Noble in Santa Monica. All right, so now we're going to move on. Let's see. I also got cassettes, not just vinyl. Check it out. We got Brad Fidel right here with Terminator 2. Love this soundtrack, Brad Fidel. Man, brilliant composer, really good stuff. He uses a lot of synthesizers in his stuff. All right, Jerry Goldsmith, Total Recall. Love me some Jerry Goldsmith. There it is right there, 2 Arnold films. Isn't that something? And then we got this one right here, James Horner, another brilliant composer, Glory right there. I think he also did the soundtrack for Willow. Yeah, he did Willow. That's another good one that I have too. But there's Glory right there. Really brilliant stuff. We've got Bill Conti, Rocky, and I do have the sequels. I have 1 through 4. I actually have Rocky 4 on vinyl, and I also have the re-release of Vince DiCola's stuff that he did for Rocky 4. And here we go, Danny Elfman. Now, this sounds a lot like the Batman 1989 soundtrack. Of course, it's Danny Elfman, but and this came out 1 year after the 1989 Batman. So it was kind of interesting hearing the similarities between those two soundtracks. But I love this one here, Darkman here. Not a big fan of the movie, but I do love the soundtrack. And here's Hans Zimmer, Power of One. This was my introduction to Hans Zimmer. Okay. And this is 1991. Even though he did stuff before this, he did a movie called Black Rain, but I didn't know it was Hans Zimmer at that point. So after seeing this movie and seeing who the composer was, I was like, "Ooh, yeah, I got to follow this Hans Zimmer guy. I got to be on the lookout for him." And that's what I would do. I would watch movies, and then if I really was captivated by the music, I would always look at the composer for the film. And keep in mind, a lot of the best movie scores, make no mistake, are before the 2000s. You'll find some really good joints in the 21st century. The Batman trilogy, Hans Zimmer, of course. You'll find some stuff in the 2000s that's pretty cool, but I would say the bulk of the really, really, really classic, good gem stuff is all before the year 2000. Soundtracks have kind of dwindled a bit. You know what I mean? They don't focus so much on the soundtrack or the score of the film. It was really a major part of the marketing campaign for a lot of movies, especially in the 80s. They would market the soundtracks. Okay. They really would, like the Beverly Hills soundtrack, Purple Rain, that's a lot of good. Okay, here we go. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Ennio Morricone, or Ennio Morricone, I think it's pronounced. But I love his stuff. And this is one of his classics, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And this is from the 60s, man. You know what I'm saying? 1967, I want to say. So a lot of good stuff. 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. You will find so much good soundtracks from that time. I'm sorry I'm geeking out right now, but that's what I do. Okay, so yes, vinyl and cassettes. Definitely. And like I said, I've listened to every one. It would be so much to the point to where I would know the dialogue. I would put in the soundtrack and I would know the dialogue at that certain point in the song. So here's another vinyl. All right, Superman. And this is a double album. John Williams, one of my favorites. And you know what's interesting about this particular album? It's a double album and it still doesn't have all the music from the film. So here's what they did. This came out in 1978, but here's what they did. What they would end up doing is they would end up re-releasing the soundtracks, like right about, I want to say, the mid to late 90s, early 2000s. They would re-release these soundtracks. So right around 2002, I was on a lovely date with a lovely, and we were hanging out in Old Town Pasadena, and I went to the Warehouse Music Store that used to be on Colorado Boulevard, and that's when I got this in 2002. So this is the re-release of the original Superman movie with all the unreleased tracks. For those of you that have been collecting, the frustration because you would want songs on the soundtrack that they're not there. And you're like, wait a second, where's that song that I love from that scene? Same thing with this one. Raiders of the Lost Ark. This is my favorite of the Indiana Jones movies. Okay, of course, the vinyl. And again, this doesn't have all the songs from the movie. So what did they do? They re-released the Indiana Jones movies, the first 4 movies anyway. They'll probably do the 5th one. I'm not going to see the 5th one. Anyway, so here it is, the collectors, right? All 4 right there. Here it is, Raiders with tracks that weren't originally released. And of course, Temple of Doom right there. Bam. Love this one. The Last Crusade. Love this one. I'm not the biggest fan of the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I'm not a big fan, but hey, it is John Williams, so you got to appreciate it. I actually listened to that one a lot less than the others, but I have listened to all of them front to back, start to finish. Okay, that's what I do. This is not just some bandwagon stuff. Okay, when I buy soundtracks, I listen to every single note and study it. Here we got this one here. The Empire Strikes Back. Love this. I have this on cassette as well. I love the artwork on the back of this album. And this is a double album. Okay, it's a double album. And again, a double album that doesn't have all of the songs from the film. Okay. I know I'm repetitive with this, but I can't tell you, for those of you that have been collecting back in the days, you knew the frustration of buying these soundtracks and not getting all of the stuff from the film. So thankfully, they decided to re-release these albums. And I have the original trilogy right here on CD. Bam, there's the first film there with unreleased tracks. We also have my personal favorite, The Empire Strikes Back. And then you have Return of the Jedi. Although I do appreciate the prequels, in my opinion, everything ended in 1983. Sorry. But I just wanted to, share that with you. Like I said, I just love movie soundtracks. I love composers. I geek out for that stuff. You know how some of you geek out for Pokemon or animation, or some of you guys are gamers. Well, that's the equivalent with soundtracks for me. And I really wish that movie soundtracks were more important in today's movies. I really wish they would kind of do this return to having that really good soundtrack. You'll find some good stuff. But it's just not a plethora of it. All right. Because once upon a time, you could count off 25 different composers. And these guys and girls, Wendy Carlos, who did Tron, did so much good stuff. So much good stuff. And each composer had their own style, even though there were similarities. James Horner, some of James Horner's stuff actually sounds a little bit like John Williams. You know what I mean? And I'm pretty sure, they had sort of a collective and kind of borrowed certain motifs. You know what I mean? Certain cues, they would probably do a similar thing. And then you had television composers like Jan Hammer, Mike Post. Mike Post did a lot of music for the 80s TV shows that were popular. And then, of course, Jan Hammer did the Miami Vice stuff, which I absolutely love, Jan Hammer. And then you had people that were a part of bands that would end up composing. Danny Elfman with Oingo Boingo. Then you had Trevor Rabin or Robin, I can't pronounce it. He used to be a part of an 80s band called Yes. He would end up doing soundtracks to movies. Mark Mancina, I don't think he was a part of a band, or maybe he was. Have to look that up. And then you also had Stewart Copeland, who used to be the drummer from the Police. He started doing movie soundtracks. Just amazing stuff, man. So I just wanted to share that with you. I used to drive through Los Angeles listening to these soundtracks, and it's pretty amazing. My life is a movie, because as I'm driving in my vehicle, cruising through LA, driving from one location to the next, I would put on a soundtrack, and I kid you not, whatever song was playing, when I would reach my destination, the song would fade out.